this session, we will now talk about your budget execution. So we're done talking about some of the items of your budget process, such as your budget legislation. And aside from your budget legislation, we also talk about your budget preparation. We said that your budget preparation, the main product of your budget preparation is the president's budget, and this president's budget will be forwarded to the Congress for your budget legislation. Now, once the legislated law or the legislated bill or the bill will pass into law, we have now a General Appropriations Act. Once there is the General Appropriations Act, it's now time to execute that budget. So, budget execution really is the spending of the budget. It is the spending. So, take note, once there is a General Appropriations Act now, which is of budget, we can now make use of that particular appropriation and we can now spend it. So in your budget execution, here the money will be spent. So the first step here is the early procurement activities. In your early procurement activities, what happens here is that before yet that the budget will be allotted, the government agencies or the pertinent items of your national government can now procure. After that, there will be a submission of monthly disbursement program. So what is this disbursement program? This disbursement program is the guidelines or the use and the release of your government funds. Now, in 3.3, submission of budget execution documents based on NEP. So we have now your budget execution documents. So your budget execution documents, these are now your agency plans and performance targets, your cash program, your cash income, and your obligations. So what will happen here is in your monthly disbursement program, we said that these are only a guideline as to the use and the release of funds. In your budget execution documents, what you have now here is your plans of the agency. And from the plans and programs, we have now your estimated cash needed from not only from your income, but also cash from your expenses or for your expenses. So for your expenses, what is important here is the list of obligations that the government agency or the instrumentality needs to pay or which are not yet due but they are demandable soon. After that, there is already an awarding of contracts. So in your awarding of contracts, these are normally part of the budget execution because under your budget execution or in the expending of your national budget or your fund, there must first be a bidding by your third parties before you enter into a contract with them. And now, once the bidding is already done and you have already chosen to whom you will award that particular program or project, what we do now is we now award the contracts. After we award the contracts, we also have your submission of adjusted BEDs based on JA. So your BEDs now will adjust based on the approved JA. Take note on your initial BEDs for your NEP, what we have here is a BED for your president's budget. While your BED now is the approved BED based on your JA for 3.5. And then now we have your 3.6. This is the release of cash allocations for first semester and then the release of NCAs for second semester. So these are actually your allotments release. These are your allotments release. So the main focus on your budget execution is that once there is already an allotment release, we now uh, create or pay our obligations. So 3.6 and 3.7 talks about your allotment release. Before we proceed further, we first discuss again what is an allotment and what is a cash allocation. Okay, so let's start first with your allotment. So allotment is the authorization to an agency to enter into an obligation. So these are released by DBM to all agencies through your agency budget matrix or special allotment release orders. So your allotment therefore comes in two ways. This is either through agency budget matrix or your special allotment release order or your SARO. Normally, your ABM are your expenditures that are not needing clearance because actually we classify under the government your expenditures either not needing clearance or needing clearance. So your ABM is an allotment for your expenditures which are not needing clearance, while your SARO or your special allotment release order is special allotment release order is a type of expenditure that needs clearance. Okay. Now your allotments, we said this is the authorization now of the DBM to the agency to incur obligations. Now, if you compare it to an appropriation, this is an authorization made by law or other legislative enactment. Please, we have already discussed this ever since we started. When we talk about appropriation, the authorization is made by law. Allotment, this is authorization made by the DBM. Why? Because once there is already the GAA, of course, is generally handled by your DBM. And your money is under your Bureau of Treasury. Therefore, the release of your GAA is not through the Congress itself. It will come from your DBM, and the approval will come from DBM, and the money will come from the Bureau of Treasury. Therefore, once the money will now be given, or the funds or properties will now be given to a particular agency, we need an allotment from your DBM. We need an allotment from your DBM. And your allotment can either be released through an ABM or through a SARO. Now, it says here that your allotment is in the form of your na ano na to? NCA. So for your NCA it is also known as your notice of your cash allocation. Now, for the records of the DBM, what we do here is we will now approve and issue the ABM and SARO. Take note, what's the process? DBM will now approve the allotment, right? BTR will release the funds. Then it will now go to your agency, which now will use the funds. That's the whole process. And that is through a notice of cash allocation. Now we said under your DBM that can be in the form of an ABM, agency budget matrix, or in the form of your SARO. Now, how does the DBM record this one? The DBM record this approval and issuance of your ABM or SARO or the allotment. So when we talk about allotment, guys, it talks about ABM or SARO. If you want it to be more specific, I will say ABM, I will say SARO. So from here now and onwards, please be do not be confused as to the usage of allotment or ABM or SARO. ABM and SARO pertains to allotment. If I want to be specific, I want it to come from ABM only, I will say ABM. From SARO only, I will say SARO only. But If I say allotment, that can be ABM or SARO. Okay? Now, as we said, your DBM will approve the allotment. Now, in your approving of allotment, that can be in the form of ABM and SARO. Now, to record that one, we have your Registry of Appropriations and Allotments, RAPAL, Registry of Appropriation and Allotments. That is the recording of the data as to the release to the government agency. And then we have also your RANCA, Registry of Allotments and NCA, or Notice of Cash Allocation, RANCA. This is the allotments and NCA issued. This is the control and monitoring record of the DBM and shall furnish it to the BTR a copy of the NCA. Why? Because we said the BTR will be the one to release the funds. Take note, RAPAL is more of appropriation. When we say appropriation, law. Now, for allotment and notice of cash allocation, we use this RANCA. That is now the DBM and NCA going to your agency. Okay? So, once there is already a GAA, the DBM will record the GAA in the RAPAL. Okay. Now, once the DBM will now approve the allotment going to the agency, where will the DBM record it? To the RANCA. Clear? Okay. Now, the RANCA will also be furnished to your BTR because, again, the allotment will be based, or the amount of the funds to be released by the BDR will be based by the allotment recorded or released by the DBM. So once there is already a furnished copy of the NCA to the BTR, what will be the BTR do? So the BTR will now record the notice of cash allocation. Okay, it will now record the notice of cash allocation, and it will enter it in the RENREP. Sir, what is RENREP? RENREP is the registry of your notice of cash allocation and your replenishment. Registry of notice of cash allocation and replenishment. So once it is now recorded there, what will happen now to the BDR? BTR now will transfer the cash from its bank accounts to the agency. So transfer the cash to the bank account, cash from the bank account to the bank account of the agency. We call this one your MDS, Modified Disbursement System. Modified Disbursement System. Okay. Now, after that, the agency will now receive it. So it will record it to the different RAO, or the Registry of Allotment and Obligations. So the agency will record it to the different RAO, Registry of Allotment and Obligations. Let's talk about it again. So first, what will happen? There will be an appropriation. So there is now a GAA. So you will record an appropriation where it will be recorded in the RAPAL. So this is in the DBM. Now, once you will approve the allotment and you will now give it to the agency, you will record it with the RANCA. So in your RANCA, Registry of Allotment and Notice of Cash Allocation. Why? Because now you are giving a notice to the BDR that you will allocate a cash to a particular agency. That's why it's called Notice of Cash Allocation. So this Notice of Cash Allocation will be received by the BTR. So this notice will be recorded in the RENREP. What is your RENREP again? Registry of Notice of Cash Allocation and Replenishment. And then You will now record the release of cash to the appropriate disbursement system or your modified disbursement system. Now, this cash will be recorded or will be received by the agency. That is now the appropriate agency. And it will record that cash to your registry of allotment and obligations. Registry of allotments and obligations. And this registry of allotment and obligations depend on what type of allotment was given. What are the types of allotment? ABM, agency budget matrix if not needing clearance. SARO, special allotment release order if it needs clearance. Take note of that. And for your RAO, you have different items of RAO. So it depends now on how you will incur the obligation, either for capital outlay, and then we have also your maintenance and operating expenses. We also have your personnel services, and then we have your financial expenses. So it depends on where will you record the allotment, depending on how you will make use of that allotment for a particular obligation. Is that for a capital outlay? So you will now record it in your RAWCO. If it is for maintenance and other operating expenses, maintenance and other OPEX, then we have your RAWMO. If it is for personal services, we have your raw ops. And then if ever it is for financial expenses, we have your raw fe. Okay, so that's how we make use of the fund. So take note, we are looking into, for government accounting, I am always telling it to you that we need to look into this whole process, the process of how the cash is given from the government or from the national government going to the government agency. After that cash or fund is given, we should account that first, the giving. So this is how we account it. After that, we account on how we disperse that government fund. So the government agency now will make use of that fund. So we look as to how the government agency will make use of that fund. How will the government make use of that fund? By incurring obligations. And your obligations depend on a particular class, either for capital outlay, for maintenance and other operating expenses, for personal services, or for financial expenses. Okay? And then ultimately, what will happen? The government agency now will disburse the money. The disbursement of the money or the payment of the obligation is through a modified disbursement system or through your commercial checks. Okay? That is for your budget execution. Now we proceed to your budget accountability. So for your budget accountability, this happens alongside your budget execution phase. So the DBM, of course, now monitors the efficiency of the usage of the particular fund. So the first one is the submission of quarterly budget and financial accountability reports. So what will happen to this? These financial accountability reports will be submitted to the DBM because the DBM should look whether that particular fund was used efficiently and effectively and economically. Remember those three items that we need to check as to the utilization of fund: efficiency, effectiveness, and economically use. Now, after that, we have the posting of disbursement assessment reports. So for your disbursement assessment reports, we now review the performance of your agency. So in your performance of the agency, what we do here is the DBM again reviews the financial and physical performance of the agencies, the utilization of funds, the accomplishments, the performance reviews, the budget performance reviews. So the DBM will now determine on how the agency really made use of the funds. After that, the publication of mid-year report for the current year and the year-end report for the prior year. And then lastly, conduct of audit. This is the most important part of this accountability. For 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3, it is the DBM only. However, in the conduct of audit, this is now the COA audit. This is now the COA audit. So aside from different performance reviews from the DBM, we also have some audits from your COA. So in your audit of the COA, this ensures the accountability of the agency as to the usage of the public funds. So what will happen here is that COA will issue an audit report based on the utilization of the fund of the agency. So this confirms now the agency performance, the budgetary level for the agency, and any issues in fund usage. But more importantly, COA focuses on the fund usage. Fund usage. And that ends the budget process of the government in your accountability. Again, accountability phase happens alongside budget execution. So as the time at the time there is an execution of the budget, we check for any accountability. Okay, so let's review the whole budget process. Again, it starts with your budget preparation. In your project preparation, there are too many processes here, starting from your agency, then going to your DBM, and from your DBM, it will go to the committee, and after the committee, it will be approved by your different heads or secretaries. And after that, it will now be the time of of the president to provide its president's budget. So what's important for me here is that you know in your budget preparation that the agency will first give its budget proposal to the DBM, and the DBM will now look into that budget proposal, and that is through its particular committee. And after that budget proposal, that budget will be forwarded and will be reviewed and will be looked into by your different undersecretaries or secretaries. And after that, it will again be reviewed, approved, whatsoever, until it will be given to your president. After there will be president's budget, we have now your budget legislation. In your budget legislation, the president's budget will now become a General Appropriations Act. But before it will become a General Appropriations Act, it will go into this process. The president budget will go to your House of Representatives and to your Senate, and it will go into your bicameral committee. After that, there will be again proposal, amendments, whatsoever, and there will be now a bill. So the General Appropriations Bill will now be passed into a law and it will become a GAA. Take note, when can we have a GAA? There must first be an approval of the bill by the president, or there is an inaction of the president, or the president vetoed the bill. However, it was overturned by two-thirds vote of the House and the Senate. After there will be a GAA, the GAA now will be executed. So budget execution. So the GAA, there will be, the GAA is called as an appropriation. And this appropriation is recorded by the DBM in its RAPAL. Now, the DBM now will issue the allotment release to your agency. But before it will be released to your agency, it will also be furnished to your BTR. The allotment release is in the form of your notice of cash allocation. And the PTR, that notice of cash allocation is recorded in the Rangka of the DBM. Now, the PTR records the NCA. The NCA will be recorded by the BTR depending on the approved allotment, ABM and SARO. It will be recorded in the books of the BTR RENREP, Registry of Notice of Cash Allocation and Replenishment. And then ultimately, the cash will be disbursed now to your agency and it will be recorded in its different RAO books, Registry of Allotment and Obligations. After that, the agency now can incur obligations and will disburse the payment for these obligations. And then lastly, we look into your budget accountability, the performance reviews on the usage or utilization of the funds of the government by the proper government agency. Furthermore, you will be audited or the government agency will be audited by the Commission on Audit, which now issues an audit report. And that is your whole budget process.